Well, on Friday, energy ministers from right around the country will join their federal counterpart Angus Taylor for a special meeting of COAG energy ministers. Via a keynote speech in Sydney today, Taylor has flagged he will demand tougher energy reliability standards at Friday's meeting and will try to reach a political consensus. But he's also made clear the problems looming for our energy network are the starkest in Victoria. And he's not kidding, with the Australian energy market operator already warning that Victoria is not expected to meet reliability standards this summer, which is regulator code for brownouts and blackouts. You've got to wonder why then the Andrews government in Victoria is continuing its push for higher and higher renewable energy targets and continues its ban on conventional gas exploration. Joining me now ahead of the critical meeting on Friday is Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor. Thank you very much for your time, Minister. Let's start with Friday's meeting. What do you want to achieve?
Well, Peter, we want to strengthen the reliability standard. So put this into context. We're seeing in some states, particularly Victoria, we've also seen it historically in South Australia, where there's barely enough reliable supply, if everything's working perfectly, to meet peak days, which are typically summer days, those hot summer days where all the air conditioners are running. And what that means is unless everything is working perfectly, you're at serious risk of blackouts. Worse than that, they're exactly the days where the price skyrockets and consumers have to pay for it. So the lack of reliable supply, dispatchable supply, which is some combination of coal, gas and hydro for the most part, means that consumers are paying too much and there's too much risk that there'll be significant blackouts, and we're certainly facing that situation in Victoria. So what we're seeking to do on Friday is strengthen that reliability standard, make sure we've got the right reliability standard in place to put downward pressure on prices and keep the lights on. Sadly, any change to the standard won't help this summer, but it can help in future summers. This summer, the truth is that there are very serious risks in Victoria in particular, but the goal here is to strengthen these standards and make sure there's enough of that reliable supply in the system to future-proof us over future summers.
And we got ourselves into this mess, haven't we, where despite all the deposits we have in this country, gas, uranium, coal, because we've introduced quite high levels of renewable energy, which is great when the wind blows, which is terrific when the sun shines, but if we have a day where that doesn't happen, or indeed we have it at night time, we have this built-in vulnerability in a system that used not to be vulnerable.
Well, exactly right. So the peak times, the dangerous times for our system, both in terms of price and in terms of reliability, is hot days after the sun's gone down, particularly if the wind isn't blowing. They're very high risk times for states like Victoria. South Australia's done a lot of work to shore up its position with the new government there in the last little while, and they're making good progress on that. But in Victoria, we've had this very dangerous cocktail of strategies, of premature closure of coal-fired power stations. We saw that with Hazelwood, a ban on conventional gas, onshore gas, exploration and development, so we're not seeing enough gas, and of course a very aggressive renewable energy target. And the combination of those factors has meant we just don't have enough dispatchable supply, as it's called, or reliable supply that's there when you need it, to ensure that prices are contained and the lights stay on at those very tough times.
Yeah, Victoria wants to be 50% renewable by 2030 and wants to get into net zero emissions by 2050. Do we see any likelihood that they'll change their current position on gas? Because if you're saying reliability is important, you want coal, gas and hydro into the system, well, Victoria shut down 24% of their coal with Hazelwood, and it has a ban on gas. Where do they go from here?
Well, it's a big problem. It means they've got to transport the gas down from the north, from Queensland, because we're seeing the Bass Strait supplies, which have been the traditional very low-cost, reliable supply for Victoria. That's starting to deplete now, and it will continue to fall away in coming years. So the only opportunity is to pipe it down from Queensland, and of course that adds a great deal to the cost. And it means that people are less inclined to want to
Minister,
build,
let me just jump in there.
Gas-fired power stations.
Let me just jump in there. You know, if they're trying to be all pure and saying that they won't use these fossil fuels, but we know they have to import the fossil fuels to keep the lights on, why aren't they just upfront and honest to say we must have gas in the mix, and we must then use Victorian gas and save taxpayers all the money of piping it from Queensland, who at this stage at least, we don't know how long this is going to last, are at least brave enough to mine gas?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly right. The Queensland Labor government has actually encouraged the growth of the gas supply, and that's a good thing for all Australians. We want to see more, of course, not just in Queensland, but in New South Wales and Victoria and elsewhere, including the Northern Territory. But the gas part of this is extremely important. It's kind of like your gas cooker at home. You can turn it on and off very quickly. So if we've got a problem in the system, your gas generator can really address that problem very, very quickly, and we certainly need that in Victoria. We've just opened a new big gas-fired generator in South Australia. I was there with AGL, the company that's done it, just a couple of weeks ago, and we opened that up, and that's going to make a real difference in South Australia this summer, but we need to see that in Victoria as well.
I mean, how do we get to this situation, Angus Taylor? You are smart, right? And in the papers today, the word was that you were frustrated beyond belief. But South Australia postured around on renewables, but always got brown coal equivalent power with the interconnector from Victoria. Then Victoria got rid of its brown coal in large part, a quarter of it, as we just said, but it's relying on the states who are brave enough to use fossil fuels to keep the lights on. And you've got Queensland now having to supply New South Wales because they've gone too hard, I think, in renewables, certainly under Don Harwin. So you've got a situation now with the imminent closure of Liddell. You've got another eastern seaboard state, our most populous state, under real energy pressure. How do we resolve this mess?
Yeah. Well, the starting point, of course, Peter, is if we want to get to affordable, reliable energy in our system, this is not the point we would choose to start from. But we are where we are, and it's the hand we have to play with. Well, there's a couple of things I'd point out here. One is we have to retain and attract that reliable baseload and dispatchable power, and that's coal, gas, and hydro. And that's absolutely essential, making sure we've got enough of that to meet peak demand, because we can't be sure the sun is going to be shining and the wind is going to be blowing when we have that peak demand time. So that's absolutely essential. But central to that is making sure we don't see the premature closure of coal-fired power stations. Of course, we saw that with Hazelwood in Victoria, and we saw a very sharp increase, more than doubling of the wholesale price as a result of that premature closure. When we look at Liddell in New South Wales, we've said well ahead of the planned closure date, we're putting together a team, a task force with the New South Wales government and AGL to sort this out. We're not going to allow ourselves to get into that same position that Victoria got itself into, and the New South Wales government's been very cooperative on that. We're working through that as quickly as we possibly can, but the outcome has to be either life extension or like-for-like replacement. We can't afford to see a sharp reduction in the supply of reliable energy in New South Wales, or we'll put New South Wales at risk of blackouts and price increases, and we're not prepared to stand by and watch that happen.
Just one more question before you go. I mean, politically, how can you be sure at a Commonwealth level, your former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull made energy very much a federal issue. If Victoria won't come to the party, if Victoria won't introduce gas into its mix, if it is shutting down more coal than it's putting into the system, if all of these things come together, and we do expect, not just you saying this is the regulator, serious brownouts and blackouts in Victoria over summer, how is that blame sheeted home to the dereliction of the Andrews government and not the Morrison government?
Well, this is a very good point. Our federation is a wondrous thing, Peter, and when you were in Parliament House working with the Prime Minister, I'm sure you shared the frustrations we all share at times of having to wear accountability without being able to have any influence on the outcomes, and that's a frustration of our federation. So to deal with that, what we're saying is we're prepared to work with collaborative states to put together energy deals where we strike deals between us and that state government to ensure that we get the affordable, reliable energy we need, but we can only do that with a state that's prepared to go down a sensible pathway on policies like the ones we've just been talking about, coal-fired power stations and availability of gas. So we're prepared to accept some accountability alongside the states, but we're only prepared to accept that with a state that has sensible policies where we can collaborate with that state. And that's a message we've sent this week very clearly, and it's a message we'll continue to send. I hope that Victoria comes to the table, because I don't want to see blackouts in future years in Victoria, and I do want to see a reduction in prices from the highest levels in Australia now in Victoria. But that will require a state government that's willing to work with us on terms that can result in a reliable, affordable supply of energy.
Well, good luck on Friday, Minister. Angus Taylor, thanks very much for your time.